Thank you, President John. Obviously, exciting days are ahead. It's my privilege and honor to introduce our speaker today. Many of you know our speaker. Dick Lincoln is the pastor of Shandon Baptist Church. He is a community leader and a fellow Rotarian. He was the president of this club in 1988, and I am told by some that those were the glory days of this club, although we may beg to differ now. Pastor Lincoln served with other community leaders such as Jim Reynolds Sr., Candy Heath, Satch Krantz, Lester Bates Jr., and our own Jack Hupp. Rotary has always been about leadership and service. Dr. Lincoln is a good example of both leadership and service. I first met Dick Lincoln when I joined Shandon Baptist in 1984. For over 30 years, I've been enamored not only with his degree of leadership and forward thinking, but his attraction to people and the desire to help them grow and to become more than when he first met them. His interest has always been invested in the lives of others. I have been privileged to watch as he has grown this church. Dr. Lincoln came to Columbia in 1979. He was 31 years old, with a mission to reach and grow people spiritually. He became the pastor of a congregation with a little over 400 people, mostly middle-aged and older, in an old church facility in Shandon. However, to make the vision come alive, he needed vibrant ministries, and that took staff, physical facility, and of course, budget. 10 years later, 1989, there's a thriving congregation of nearly 1,500 at the original campus on Woodrow Street. Things were moving well. Now, with ongoing and growing ministries, a fully trained staff to run it, an obstacle appeared. The size of the building was maxed out. No room to grow any longer, but his mission to reach and grow people was not finished. So then a bold move to lead a building program and to relocate a thriving congregation. And then in 1996, a totally new campus on Forest Drive was ready to move in for the church. The outcome has become to lead and grow the 1,500 member congregation to nearly 5,000 today, along with 3 major building programs to elevate the campus to the facility that it is today. However, Pastor Lincoln will tell you it was never about counting people or building buildings, but was and always has been about reaching people where they are, changing their lives with the power of the gospel message. That was the original mission when he was called as pastor, and continues as his mission as the leader of the church that is called Shandon Baptist. You see, for Dick Lincoln, it's always been about the people, not only allowing the people to be who they are, but giving them the opportunity to grow and to change and to become more than when he first met them. This is what true leaders do. They invest in people's lives. True leaders inspire and make other leaders too. Pastor Lincoln is one of those leaders worth following. He instills a confidence that shows each of us that we have the ability to become a leader. A leader in our homes as fathers and mothers. A leader where we live and work. And ultimately, leaders to grow our community, our state, our nation, and lead our world for good. Would you join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Dick Lincoln, Shandon Baptist Church.
Well, it is really a privilege to be back, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you about a subject that's dear to my heart. I want to ask Kirk Johnston, do you do that thing about working for your Lord and Savior every time, or was that just for me?
No, sir, it's pretty much
Do it every time? Okay, good. Well, what are you doing this Sunday morning? Can you take an offering?
Actually, I'm coming down to see John. Yes, sir.
If you can take an offering and you'll make that speech, I'll hand it over to you this Sunday morning. I won't pay you anything, but I'd love to have you. Leadership is an amazing topic. And as I think about what this club means to this community and what it has meant to me, there's a passage of Scripture that says we have this treasure in earthen vessels. And I don't know why I've always pictured every human being as being a treasure chest. And God puts some of the treasure in when we are created. But then we go through life, and there are people who open you up and put treasure in. Now, most people open you up looking for something to take out. They want something from you. But there are people everywhere you go who open you up and put things in. And there were a lot of people who were members of this club who put things into me, some members of this church, some people that I had the privilege of knowing as fellow citizens in our Columbia community. And so it is a real personal privilege to be back. And it's a humbling one to talk about leadership to leaders. But I am looking forward to talking with you about some ideas and thoughts I've had that I've seen work for other people. When we moved my mother out of the house that my sister and I grew up in, I found a black book that was my father's diary from World War II. And I was thinking about it this morning as I was preparing my remarks. That diary ended on this very day, December the 8th, 1941. And he survived the war, obviously, but the last thing in his diary was, we just heard that the President and the Congress have declared war on Germany and Japan. Now the whole world is at war. What an awful world. And with that, nothing else is written in the diary. Now, I wish he had gone on to write about what it was like because he was in the U.S. Public Health Service as a physician and was in a lot of amazing places, and I would like to have known what it felt like. But that was the last you hear from him in the diary. But into the turmoil of World War II stepped the greatest leaders that you can read about in this country since probably the Civil War, because it's hard to get any better than Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and Ulysses S. Grant, and excuse me for saying so, but William Tecumseh Sherman. They were great, great military leaders who formed much of what we know about battles today. Leadership's a funny old thing. Nobody likes it, but nobody's ever been able to figure out how to get along without it. And so inertia is always working. You know, a body at rest tends to stay at rest. So if you want to get an organization moving, somebody has to push it. And a body that's in motion tends to stay in motion unless it encounters an obstacle. And so every organization needs someone to get it in motion and needs someone to keep it in motion when it encounters obstacles and difficulties. And I think of inertia as being the same thing to a leader that sin is to me: job security. As long as mothers keep producing sinners, I will have something to do. And as long as organizations encounter inertia, leaders are going to have something to do. That's good news. Now, I want to talk with you today about what a leader is, what are a leader's tools, and what are some things that you can do to develop or renew your own leadership. Because my experience with leadership has been that most of my failures as a leader are not because of things I don't know, but because of things that I do know and have not been acting on the basis of. So maybe this will help you develop some new ideas or go back to some old ones that have worked for you. What's a leader's calling? What does a leader do? I don't think it makes any difference whether you lead a military unit, whether you lead a church, whether you lead a business, whether you lead in government. I think that leaders basically do two things, and there are tons of definitions of a leader's work. Mine is that a leader creates motion and direction. A leader creates motion and direction. For me, if I wonder whether I am leading at Shandon Baptist Church, I ask, are we moving and are we going in a direction that would please God and please the people here who lead in behalf of God? Now, it can seem like an overly simple concept that leaders produce motion and direction. But you got to understand the most important word in that definition is the word "and." Because what substitutes often for leadership is motion without direction or direction without motion. But everybody I've ever seen or read about who is a successful leader does both. The problem with motion is you can have an unbelievable amount of motion and exhaustion running around in a very small circle. And almost everybody that ever wrote a book about some kind of theory, if you ask them, where do you think we ought to go, they can point the way. But if you ask them to get you there, they can't. The leader is the person that says, why are we sitting still and where do we want to be? And who can come up with an answer for that question. So I think it behooves all of us who are leaders in our homes. Where am I moving my family? Are we moving, and in what direction are we going? Am I moving my business? Am I moving my organization? What motion am I creating, and what direction is that motion heading in? Second, what are a leader's tools? Now, every book you read has got different ideas about these tools. Let me mention 5. The first is the love of limits. One of the problems that I think we have in America is also one of our great strengths, and that is we think there's nothing we can't do. And so the problem that most leaders get into is they begin to think, since there's nothing I can't do, which is a great positive outlook, they also decide there's nothing I shouldn't try. Now you think about where most of our power comes from, our electric power comes from in the city of Columbia. It comes from those generators up there at the Lake Murray Dam. You take that dam away from Lake Murray and what do you got? A puddle. It'll eventually turn out to be something about that deep and it will have no power at all. That river has power when it is limited. And an awful lot of people feel like limits are a problem, something not to be liked. The truth of the matter is, every effective leader understands his limits and embraces them and uses as many resources as he can to run between the banks of the limits. But the leader that believes that you can go in lots of different directions is going to create crazy motion and not truly directional motion. The second is resources of all kinds, especially people. Every leader has to be able to marshal financial resources, physical resources, intellectual resources, and most of all, human resources. And it is unbelievable how many resources are available and how good effective leaders are at finding resources that other people cannot see. I have a friend who was the medical director at the Medical University of South Carolina named Alan Johnson before he retired. And Alan was telling me that before he went to work at the medical university, he had a pretty high-end internal medicine practice. And he had a really extensive medical history that everybody had to fill out before they came to see him. And he was used to seeing most of them typed by somebody's secretary, but some of them would be hand-filled in, and the handwriting was always beautiful. He said one day he got one, and the spelling was terrible, and the handwriting was barely legible. And where there was was punctuation, it was all wrong. And he thought, I wonder what this guy's going to be like. I mean, if he can afford to come to me, I'll be glad to see him. And this guy came in and he said he looked just like his handwriting. And so he just decided to talk to him for a little while. And he said, what do you do? And he said, well, basically I'm an inventor. He said, really, what's your education? He said, I finished the 3rd grade. My father died and I had to go to work on the farm. He said, what have you invented? He said, well, I hold 375 patents. Most of them belong to companies like General Motors and International Harvester. And he said, I don't know why, I have no education, but I've always been able to look at a problem and see a solution. And he said, one thing I did that you may have heard of is that you remember when we got off the beach at Normandy, that we could not get through the hedgerows? And that somebody thought if we take a piece of railroad rail and cut it in half and weld it on the bottom of a patent tank and make a wedge out of it, we'll be able to push through? And Alan said, yeah. He said, well, that was me. He said, I was a private, and I heard people complaining about it, and I thought, well, let's give this a try. And he said, I've been doing that ever since. You never know what kind of resources are around, and leaders can get so focused on themselves that they don't think about other great resources. Great leaders find great resources in lots of places other people wouldn't think to look. A third is a kind of a recent thing people talk about. There's nothing new about it. It's just been recognized recently, emotional intelligence. The ability to read your own emotions in others, the ability to utilize your own emotions in others. It is amazing to me how much damage I have done by my own emotional non-intelligence, and how much damage I have seen others do by loss of temper or by reflexive withdrawal from social situations and the refusal to say what you think in a way that people can hear. Emotional intelligence. If you want to see an example of it in a black and white picture, get any biography of Dwight D. Eisenhower and look at that picture of him talking to 5 or 6 enlisted men on D-Day, and at the look on this 4-star general's face as he interacts with these men who are going to be running down a ramp and up a beach into the face of the Atlantic Wall. And you will see a man who had unbelievable emotional intelligence along with lots of other things. A fourth is judgment. Actually, 2 of the things that I see in every leader I've ever read about is judgment and drive, and those are the last 2 I want to talk with you about for a second. Judgment, where does it come from? I think for the most part, it's learned by the proper use of perfectly good pain. I tell people on our staff, if you've messed up or something has gone wrong, admit it. There's no problem we can't fix if we recognize it. But there's no problem we can fix if you hide it from me. And let's just remember, if it hurts to admit it, pain is a fabulous teacher. I have learned much more from pain than I ever thought about learning from success and pleasure. So don't run from it, learn from it. Jonas Salk, the inventor of the Salk vaccine that has eliminated the polio that has been eliminated around the world, grew up in a remarkable home, and he was at his grandmother's house one day, and his grandmother had said, "Now Jonas, when you want milk, call me, because I don't want you picking up this gallon milk jug." And so one day he thought, well, I'm a big boy and I don't want to call my grandmother and I'm going to get it myself. So he gets it out of the refrigerator, is walking across to the glass, and it's slick and heavy and it's glass. He falls out of his hand and just shatters all over the floor. Well, his grandmother heard it and she came down there and she looked at him and said, "Jonas, do you understand now why I told you not to hold the milk jug?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am," and he was ashamed. She said, "Jonas, let's see if you and I can learn to clean up a gallon of milk and some broken glass." And that was the kind of home he grew up in, a home where he was taught to learn from pain. And finally, there is drive. I don't think I need to explain drive. It's the ability to keep on when others quit. Louis Zamperini in the book Unbroken by Lauren Hillenbrand. I hope that we're not going to see too much Angelina Jolie in this. Louis Zamperini is a lot more interesting than a Hollywood star, but the phrase that I see in the commercials for the movie say over and over again, "If I can take it, I can make it." I don't remember that from the book, but it's still a good phrase. I think about Key Powell, who was a very fine member of this club and a good friend of mine, always in a great mood. And I remember one time he sent me a note on his own personal stationery, and at the top of it, it had a picture of a rhinoceros's head and his sort of philosophy of life: grow a thick skin and charge. And I've never forgotten that when I think drive is necessary for something being achieved. And then the greatest picture I know of right now is the running back for the Seattle Seahawks, that Marshawn Lynch. I tell you, I don't know why anybody wants to get in his way. The guy is a killer. So drive, the ability to keep on going when others quit and when it may make sense to quit. How can you develop or renew your leadership on a regular basis? The first thing is read. I have prepared a list of some books I've read recently. Most of them are biographies. There's one called The Generals by Thomas Ricks. George Catlett Marshall, Eisenhower, Wade Hampton. How many of you have read a biography of Wade Hampton? Every one of you needs to read a biography about this native son. I had no earthly idea what he was like apart from Rich. He's one of the greatest men I've ever read about. He is Abraham Lincoln-esque. And there are two biographies that I've read. One is by a guy named Brian Sisko. It's my favorite of the two. The other is by a professor at Clemson who did his best not to like him and couldn't pull it off. And so it's kind of interesting. The one by the Clemson professor is about 400 pages long, and Sisko's is about 250 pages. There is a great book on here called A Failure of Nerve. It's very different from most business and leadership books, which I would say are 3 pages of content squeezed into 150 pages. This is 150 pages of content squeezed into 150 pages of print. It's the best analysis of modern leadership and its challenges I've ever seen. And then the final thing is 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3. What good is a preacher if he can't mention Scripture? This is the greatest short statement of what good leadership looks like I've ever read in anything. 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3. So read. Second of all, listen to just about everyone. I played golf with the CEO of the 3rd largest employer in the state of Oklahoma, larger even than Phillips Petroleum. He was the CEO of a great hospital system in Tulsa. And I said to him, do you have trouble finding out what's really going on in your organization? He said, yeah, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to find out. And I said, well, what have you done about that? He said, well, I have a meeting once a week that my secretary sets up, and she picks people from every area of work in our hospital. Usually there are janitors, nurses' aides, nurses, and said the only thing she can't have is high-level administrators. I meet with them enough. But I want to hear from people who will tell me what they hate about working here and what they like about working here. And I do this every once in a while, and it can be very useful. Listen to just about everyone. Of course, you have to have good judgment about who you let guide your life. Number 3, hang around with people who are way ahead of you. One of the things I have noticed about preachers is most of them spend most of their time around the people that make them comfortable. The ones who succeed over time spend most of their time around people who challenge them. Now, I don't want to be around people that make me feel like a nobody, but the people who are way ahead of me are the people that we learn best from. So I would say to you, it's good to be comforted, it's good to be at peace, it's good to enjoy life and to be around people that see things your way. But if you want to grow as a leader, you need to spend time with people who are ahead of you and challenge you. 4th, love, value, keep, and reward positive critics. A positive critic is a person that doesn't want to change you, doesn't want to manage you, doesn't want to govern you, but will tell you the truth. Whatever you may think about Hillary Clinton, and I know in any large group you've always got differences of opinion, but I've loved that statement that she made recently about needing some people around you when you're in that bubble who can keep you real. This is the positive critics. They will say something critical to you, but they are positive in their belief in you and in their belief in what you are and what you can be. Finally, pray. Be a man or a woman of prayer, and I have learned something in the last year about prayer that I'll just pass on to you and then stop. Pray developmentally. When you hear from these positive critics, when you hear from people who tell you you need to be doing differently, you need to be doing better, go to the Lord with that and have some humility about it and say, is this something you want me to do? And then pray and begin asking God, help me to be this kind of a father, this kind of a mother, this kind of a friend, this kind of a boss, this kind of an investor, this kind of a whatever it is that you think you ought to be. Don't worry too much about whether you're asking him to do something super spiritual. Just pray and ask to develop as a leader and as a person, and you might be surprised what will happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lincoln. This is from the club. Appreciation of your time. Dr. Lincoln, he's definitely a leader worth following, worth listening to. He's done amazing things at our church at Shandon. He did great things for this club. He's done great things for the community. If you do get an opportunity this weekend, Shandon is putting on the Singing Christmas Tree. That's done every year under Dr. Lincoln's leadership and direction. It's a great event to bring your family out to, and that's at no cost. It's just a great event the church does for the community. President-elect Mark has a special announcement on the new leadership for the upcoming Rotary year.
Thank you, President John. I do have a special announcement to let you all know who the 2015-16 board members are. These are the folks that will lead with me starting next July 2015 through June of 2016. So I'll announce all 7 names, and if you'd all meet me over here in the corner after the meeting. First, John Bacus. John, if you'd stand. Catherine Davis. Okay. Libby Gober. Robert Goings. Beth Irick. Elliot Powell. And Jack Sloan. Let's give it over here. Thank you all for your service. Look forward to working with you. One more announcement. I'm sorry? Okay. One more announcement. Next Monday we have Denise Holland, who's going to speak to us from Harvest Hope Food Bank. Given all that we've done with Harvest Hope this year, we thought it'd be a good way to end the calendar year hearing from Denise on everything going on at Harvest Hope.
Thank you, President-elect Mark, and congratulations to the new elected members, and thank you to all the members that volunteered to be on the ballot. What you do for our club keeps us moving, keeps us contributing to our community, and for all of you, everyone in this room, you know, we provide service here through our club, but we also do it through our churches, we do it through other organizations such as the Salvation Army. This is truly a great club to be a member of. We'd like to turn it over to one of our leaders, Jack Huck, who's been a past president, who will close us out with some special comments.
Thank you very much, President John. We've had a lot of comments, and Dick, thank you very much for your comments about leadership. The program is about leadership today. We have a newly elected board, and those people are going to be excellent leaders for our club, but we have to remember that we have a current board that has demonstrated from this program the willingness to step outside the box and to do things that are going to lead this club in maybe a slightly different direction. John Johnston has been an outstanding professional role model. He's our president, and Mark Sullivan is going to follow in his footsteps and do just as good a job, and we appreciate all that. But what I want to talk about leadership for just a moment, and I want to tell you all to go home today and look in the mirror, because each of you is a leader, and you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to see a leader, and that's really important because you can't be in this club unless you're the proprietor or somebody running a business or a profession or in an executive capacity that has discretionary authority over other people. And just remember that, because you're sitting here and I'm looking at a room full of leaders. Now, my favorite definition of a leader was what happened to be President Eisenhower's, and it was getting something done, getting someone to do something that you want done because they want to do it. And I really think that that's important right now, and I'd suggest that we take this program and we take it to heart and demonstrate the support for our board, for our leadership in the club, and look in the mirror at the leaders that you see there, and just do what you can to make this happen. Thank you very much.
quick reminder, Dr. Lincoln has a suggested reading list here. We look forward to seeing everyone on June 18th, and for the sake of time, we will forego music.